and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to take you through the journey of this painting here, which isn't quite finished yet. But I have some lessons learned that I thought would be helpful to share. I hope you enjoy, and if you haven't subscribed to our channel, I would greatly appreciate if you do. Thank you so much. So this is the first picture I took of this painting when I started this toward the fall. And I liked the colors that I started with. I liked the contrast. And then I overdid it. So this is another picture that I took where I added some layers and really was not happy with what I had done. It was way too heavy-handed, although I did like the texture. The other thing that happened is I got too precious about this painting too quickly. I loved the areas by the red that had kind of this leopard print look. So I was trying to preserve them, which is always not a good thing, especially in the beginning of a painting. So in this next stage, you can see where I've added some quiet areas just to tone the painting down a bit. Then I think I'm close to being done, and I put an oil glaze in many of the areas. So I've now moved from acrylic painting to oil. The challenge with this now is I've decided I don't like the painting as is, and for me to do anything else on it, I really need to add oils because I've already moved from acrylic to oil. So this really limits what I can do to this surface now. At least it feels that way to me, and maybe it's because I'm more comfortable and use acrylics more often than oil. In this stage here, I've drawn on some shapes that I love, letters, just to give it more interest. And this is really where my first mistake comes in, because normally I do this with pencil, and for whatever reason, I used like a black charcoal. And you'll see I really struggle with that as I go forward with the smearing and smudging. So one of the products I now use with my oil paint is this Neo Melgip. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. And then also the Galkide to make sure that, one, the Galkide helps things dry. The other medium is to help with transparency. And so what I'm doing here is working into these shapes and areas that I've created to break up the surface and, just create some more interest. The problem here is that because I've used this charcoal to create these shapes, which I made on paper, and then I transferred them over onto the canvas for some of them, and others I just, did freehand or what have you. But because I used that charcoal, I'm really struggling with the paint that I'm putting down and the blending that's happening, and it's really creating a mess. And I really wanted to get kind of those true colors and those true levels of transparency. Normally I love charcoal, but I normally use it in a much earlier stage in the painting. So you'll see here that I'm having to wipe it off and kind of try and clean things up. And this actually takes me, gosh, I think this takes me a couple of days to really get this right. It was frustrating because I was already frustrated that I had moved over to this oil painting part of my process too early, and this was just another lesson learned here. Because of some of the smudging that I encountered, I had to go back over many of these shapes. So as I said, this took me a bit. And at first I tried to be really careful about not hitting the lines, but then everything kind of had this dark gray outline or black outline, which I wasn't looking for. And again, if this was acrylics, I would have had no problem kind of moving over this in a way where I could have covered those lines with a very opaque manner quickly, and having the paint dry very quickly to kind of move on to the next phase. And this was, I guess, on the bright side, this gave me an opportunity to practice more with oil paints and mediums to kind of correct what mistakes I had made. Part of the challenge, though, is it takes so long for oil paint to dry, which is why, although using the Galkid medium with the oil paint really helped, because what I found is that overnight was enough time for it to dry. Part of what I'm doing here now is um, bringing in a dark indigo to create more variation in the values of this painting as well. I feel like there were too many medium and light tones at this point, so bringing in that indigo was really helpful, and I continue to do that throughout this phase of the process. Here I'm playing with some transparency, so I'm using that other paint medium to create a more transparent version of kind of an indigo Payne's gray application. And again, I'm still, as you can see, kind of fighting with the smearing that's going on with the outlines. But I fight my way through, and am starting to see some things that I like and really appreciate the contrast that some of these darker colors are bringing into this painting. Surface texture is a big part of my work. So one of the things that I'm doing as well is thinking about how I can make sure that these areas aren't just looking flat. And so in this next phase, I'm going to bring in some of my favorite tools and use those to kind of scrape into some of the oil paint to create different textures and patterns, which I think really gave a bit of life to this layer. So here are the tools I'm using. This one is a clay tool that I use, and it's got like 5 spines on it. This one, which is a little bit hard to see, is it's a tool that has a little tiny ball at the end of it, and I think it's used for embossing, but I have a number of these tools that I use for clay and for painting. And then just a wooden stick skewer that I'm using to put some stripes into this particular area here. But those are basically the 3 tools I use, and I do have to be careful with the metal scraping clay tool so that I don't damage the canvas. I use that tool a lot when I use cold wax and oil, and the cold wax creates a bit of a thicker layer on the canvas, so I don't have to worry as much. Here I'm using a shop towel just to remove some of the glaze to give it a little bit extra surface texture as well. Here's a bit of a close-up on working on this one section, just so you can see the smearing that's going on there. Like doing this area in white was just a nightmare. You can see there again the smearing. At this point, I start wiping down some of these lines to try and get the residual off to stop some of the smearing that's going on. And again, if this was acrylic still, I would have used an isolation layer medium on top of this, which would have helped with the smearing. But because this is oil, I didn't have a medium that would work on top of oil, and I wanted to make sure I created this painting properly. So I just continue to go for it and work through the problem, knowing that there will be some benefits that come out of it. As I add more color with a different variation of values, I'm really liking the punch of the dark colors that I've put on this painting. So I'm starting to like what's happening. Galkide is the medium that I'm using with the oil paint. Again, I'm trying to get this painting finished, so using that medium sure helps in terms of being able to dry oil paint overnight. Now here I'm going back in over some of these transparent layers. And my goal of this layer now is to push some of these shapes back into the painting because I don't want it to look like it's all sitting on top of the painting. Here I'm using rulers to create more straight lines, which is unusual for my work, although this painting is part of a series that I've been working on called Big Questions that is a little bit more bold and has some added precision to some of the layers. So I'm using some tools that I don't use very often. And you can also see in the left-hand mid corner, there's some red marks that have been added. I did use oil pastels and R&F pigment sticks. Just again, to make sure that this doesn't look like these shapes are just floating on top of the surface. So I kind of keep messing with that one little area and decide that I'm going to add some white in different areas to disrupt some of these shapes so that they're not so perfect. So in the top right hand corner here, I'm adding some white oil paint with some medium to add a bit of a glaze. So up close you can still see some of the underneath layers through the color, but I'm really wanting to disrupt the shape a bit, and that's what I'm working on here. Now I go back again to this shape and I elongate it from the shape that was underneath. You can see here that I'm also changing kind of the end of the shape as well, just to blend it in a bit more and give it a little bit more interest. So I'm liking the lines and the angles as well. I'm adding a bit of white glaze in this area, again to interrupt some of the shapes that I've added to the surface. And I'm continuing to turn the painting to help me overcome kind of the preciousness I feel about certain areas. That's one of the techniques that I use. Here I'm just adding R&F pigment sticks, oil sticks, just to change the shade of that color a bit because it looked a little flat. And I always wear gloves when I'm working with oil paint. Actually, I wear them often when I work with acrylic paint as well, but I tend to blend oil paints with my thumb quite a bit, so I always make sure I have gloves on. Here I'm adding some more angled lines just to create contrast between kind of that round form and then creating more of a straight form. Same thing in this area. This is one of the protected kind of precious areas, so what I want to do is just disrupt what's happening there. And I'm using this red R&F oil pigment stick. And I've decided that that original line was the same length as the kind of turquoise lines on the left-hand side. So I'm elongating it because, again, this is constantly, for me anyway, about making contrast. Now I'm using a white pigment stick just to break up some other areas. Here I'm also taking out some oil crayons. Actually, this is a green R&F oil stick that I'm using. It's a bit of an apple green. And I'm adding that next to the red because those are contrasting colors or complementary colors. They're the opposite on the color wheel, which is where you get that contrast and variety. So that red punches more when there's a green next to it. And that green punches more when there's red or orange next to it. So this is another mistake. So I have these R&F sticks. Don't keep them in the tubes, because once you open them up and put them back in the tube, they get stuck. And in this case, I had to cut the tube open to get at this color, and it wasted maybe an inch of the stick, and they're not inexpensive. So my recommendation is don't put them back in the tubes, which I actually think is on the package when you buy them, not to keep them in the tubes. So I'm continuing to look for areas that I can create contrast. And again, because I'm using oil paints, I'm limited to what I can use. So I'm using R&F oil sticks. This shows you the amount of oil stick that I wasted trying to get those out of the tube. When that happens, it's happened before, I just put them in a little jar to keep them so I can use that paint. Now I keep most of my R&F sticks that I've used in a tub. I let them dry. That creates a skin over the top of them. You just peel the skin off or wipe the skin off to get started again. Here I'm using a little bit of mostly white oil paint to break some things up, lines and new marks that I've made. Pushing items back, highlighting items. I'd like to take a moment just to say, if you're not subscribed to my channel, I would sure love it if you would. Thank you so much. So as I feel like I'm finished with this painting, I always take a picture and then look at it in grayscale to make sure that I have enough variety in value of color, which I'm pretty happy with. There's lots of light areas and some interesting dark areas to lead your eye around the painting. Here's some shots of the painting finished. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sometimes we struggle as we work through a painting, and I was happy with it in the end. There's great surface texture, love the colors and the contrast, and think that it really speaks to the big question series I'm working on, but did want to share with you some of those struggles and some of my lessons learned. Please subscribe to my channel, and thank you so much for watching.